so Peter had gotten into directing, and I went in to read for Stargate at one point, and I did the audition, and I wasn't happy. And it was one of those moments where, it's not something you should do all the time, but I'm like, that wasn't really my work. I was trying to impress somebody rather than do my work. So I just went back. I asked, can I go? I'm going to go. I didn't ask for permission, actually. I said, I'm going to go back in. I need to do that again. And I said, Peter, I got to do that again. That wasn't me. That wasn't my work. And he goes, yeah, man, go ahead.
What do you think happened? What do you think happened the first time through? What was rattling around in your head that it wasn't an honest version of you?
Yeah, I don't specifically remember what was going through my head, but I do remember walking out of there going, oh, that wasn't my best work.
Okay.
Again, I think there's a difference between going into a room and try to impress somebody. Oh, let me jump through the hoops that I think they want me to jump through. And that can be really dangerous. And I think probably I fell in, that's a huge trap. I think I might have fallen into that trap. And so when I walked out, I go, man, that wasn't me. That was just a version of me trying to impress somebody, And so I went back in there and did what I wanted to do, which, sometimes when you take risks, I don't want to say that was a risk, but it was a risk. I don't want to say my choices were risks, but going back into the room and saying, instead of apologizing and just going, I'm coming back in and I'm doing that again, that's a risk. Yeah. I don't necessarily recommend that for every audition. You've got to be damn sure you know what you're doing and not just trying to, pretend like you can jump in the saddle and do this. But, you've got to know that you didn't do your work and now you're going to show them your work. And if you're sure of that, then yeah, take that risk. So I did it and I got the job and, it led to a recurring role for a few years. And, I don't remember a ton, to be honest. It was so long ago, but I remember being on sets. I remember, versions of it. I remember working with Peter and, of course, Michael and Shanks and I had auditioned for a lot of the same stuff. I mean, I auditioned for Daniel, we all did, so, but obviously he was perfect. I think at that time, he could be cool, but he could be kind of nerdy and he was a good actor, he knew what he was doing and he knew what it took to be that actor. And I think he played it differently than James Spader did in the movie. But he was perfect for it. And, it's there's not very often where I'm envious of somebody for getting a job because when you look at their work and you go, yeah, man, that guy deserved it. And, Michael was one of those guys that deserved everything he got, which isn't always the case. But, it's nice when you audition for something and you go, I should have gotten that. And then you see the guy that got it, you go, oh, all right, that's cool. You're like, so it's, so that's what I mean. I'm not, I'm not an envious person because I can see, he worked his ass off and deserved it and deserved his run and, probably wanted to, do something different after 8 years, left for a couple of years and came back. And, so I get that, it's a struggle. This business is a struggle and you don't want to get too complacent, which is how I started this whole interview is just, complacency. And I learned that from some actors that I worked with over the years, don't get complacent, don't get comfortable with the paycheck.
Right.
Because you can easily get into a lifestyle that is, you're addicted to the lifestyle and now you're beholden to the lifestyle. You've basically made a deal with the devil. And so, that's, you got to be careful with that in this business.
You have to be, before you can start putting on the clothes of other characters, putting on their skin, it's probably a good idea to be really comfortable in your own first. Sounds like it's a lot of what you're saying. And be sure of what it is that you want and not what other people say that you should want.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, after I studied with Vaughn, I moved on to Larry Moss, a good friend of mine. Well, she wasn't a friend of mine at the time, but big actress by the name of Laurie Holden, who probably many people know from Walking Dead. She was Andrea the first 3 years in Walking Dead. And But she was my neighbor in Vancouver. But Lori was very, sort of, I'm just tunnel vision. And as far as even walking down the street, like we didn't have phones back then, but she was just sort of like had her objective, and anything to the left or right was non-noticeable. But, I knew she was, and she'd done X-Files and all that stuff. And she was a good actress. And one time I was on a plane, and we happened to be sitting together, and we talked the whole time. And the next day she dragged me into Larry Moss's acting class that honestly saved my life, my career. But one of the things he said, to your point, was it's hard to be an actor. I come from a lot of, trauma, if you will. I didn't do drugs or drinking, or I never became an addict or anything like that. But that doesn't mean, that I didn't suffer a lot of trauma as a young boy. But he's like, look, you cannot move forward unless you take responsibility for this trauma. And a lot of people don't take responsibility because they want to blame other people, right? It's never their responsibility. But it's a weird thing, taking responsibility for trauma that you experienced as a child. And you're like, you don't need to know how to take responsibility. You just need to be willing to take responsibility. Know that we all carry shit in our life, and we all carry trauma. But the second we just accept that, basically take responsibility for the fact that you can take responsibility for where you're going, you don't owe anybody anything, and that you need to do what you need to do. And you're only going to get, as you can't be somebody else, you have to be yourself, and you have to do what you want. Going into that room, you need to take responsibility, do what you want. And I think we spend, as an actors, again, we spend way too much time trying to figure out what they want. And I think, perfect example of that is watching a scene in one of Larry Moss's classes, and these very talented actors who fell into that trap were doing a scene, and, he kind of stopped them after just a couple minutes, which he usually doesn't do. And he said, well, you're basically off base of what the play's about. And he goes, yeah, but, they said, well, yeah, but Larry, we did it like 1,000 different ways. Because these guys, that do Larry's class, they're in there. Before they put it out, they're working for like a good solid 40 hours of, doing this. They don't just like, oh, I'll do this the night before and put it up tomorrow.
They've been really drilling it.
They're drilling this model. Wow. And so they came in, and he stopped them, which is like totally, so disheartening. And but he stopped them, and he said, look, you're off. And they go, but Larry, we did it like 1,000 different ways. Well, what was genius about him is that, yeah, you did it. You tried it 1,000 different ways, but you didn't pick one. You need to pick one. And I remember one time separately to me, because I worked with him quite a lot alone, he said, it doesn't matter if you make the wrong choice. In fact, the director doesn't care if you make the wrong choice. He just wants to see you pick something. But if you commit to that one thing, that's better than 99.9% of the people that walked into that room that day. Because you picked something. May have been wrong, but you picked it, and you committed to it, and you put your shoulder into it. So then the director might go, God damn, that was totally wrong, but fuck, he committed to that. And so he goes, well, the director might go, well, do it this way. And if you can do it that way, it's because you did it 1,000 ways, but then you picked one when you went into the room. That's the difference. Yeah,
you can take direction, and you are moldable. They can work with you.
Yeah. As long as it's a collaborative effort, and you commit to it, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have disagreements with the director, because the director's job is to basically take what's on the page and what the actors have to say and try to find a common ground between those two so he can tell a story. But, I don't think, actors get as much credit as they probably should for being a part of that collaborative effort, but at the same time, good directors don't get enough credit as well.
Thanks for watching this clip from Dial the Gate. You can find the full live stream shows on our YouTube channel or visit dialthegate.com for the complete schedule. See you on the other side.